Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener-supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Hi, this is Tracy, Hails Fast, right on Four Corners. Today I'm talking with John Turk about his book, Tracking Lions, Myth, and Wilderness in Samburu. Hi, John.
Hi, Tracy. How are you?
I'm good. I was really impressed with Tracking Lions, Myth, and Wilderness in Samburu. It's a very good book, and I think it's an important book.
Wow. Well, thank you for the compliment. That's really wonderful.
Yeah, you worked hard on this. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about it?
Yeah. Well, I went to Africa to ostensibly working with the Lions Conservation Society to try to help the Samburu people. The Samburu people live in northeastern Kenya, and they're a herding people. So lions eat cows, and the Lion Conservation Society in America is interested in helping the Samburu people build a détente between the people and the cattle and the lions so that we can essentially coexist.
Right.
And so I'm out there on day 3 tracking a lion, and to back up a little, I gave a TEDx talk a few years ago called Big Brain No Tools. And in that TEDx talk, I explored the evolutionary fact that people evolved big brains before they invented sophisticated tools and weapons.
Right.
So big brains are an expensive metabolic organ, and the question is, what were we doing with our big brains before we were building tools?
Yep.
So now I'm tracking a lion in Samburu, and I'm armed only with a wooden club. And suddenly I realize I am this big-brained person with no tools. And how am I going to survive? And by implication, how did our Paleolithic ancestors survive? So that's the start of the book. I start exploring both my own experience and the anthropological literature to understand what we were doing with our big brains. And the answer is we were cooperating, we were loving, we were making art, we were thinking about things that don't exist, we were dancing. And this is wonderful. This makes me feel so good that deep in our core, we're this dancing, artistic, joyful, cooperative species, and it gives you a really fuzzy feeling about who we are and how to live one's life. But then, unfortunately, the dark side shows up, and before the end of my stay, I become involved, not directly, not pulling the trigger, but I'm in the world where there's tribal warfare and where the dark side of humanity comes out and people are shooting each other. So then I have to explore that transition between this wondrous human attribute and the dark side.
The contrast there really sets off what else you cover in the book, which is a lot. You cover a lot of ideas and philosophy and speculation on the human race.
Well, thank you. That was intentional.
Good.
I say in the preface that, in a sense, this is my boldest book. But I started writing environmental science textbooks in 1970, 50 years ago.
Wow.
And all this time, I've been approaching environmental issues from a scientific point of view mainly, and from kind of the edge of just saying, oh, it's clear we should be doing this, this, and this, and therefore we should be doing this, this, and this, which is kind of flat. It lacks depth. Mm-hmm. And the science is good. I'm a scientist. I believe in science. In no way am I putting science down. But over these 50 years, science has been not enough. Mm-hmm. Human beings on the planet are continuing to get in deeper and deeper trouble. And I think that to take this next step, we need what I call a consciousness revolution. Right. We need to rethink the way we live. And I read things about paleo diets and paleo this and paleo that. But what I'm talking about is a paleo mindset, a mindset where we return to accept our vulnerability mm-hmm. and live on the planet with that acceptance.
Right. And you experienced that mindset in your lion hunt.
Yeah. My whole life, I've been an adventurer. I grew up as a scientist. I have a PhD in organic chemistry. And then I became an adventurer and eventually a professional adventurer. I've been rated by National Geographic as one of the top 10 adventure athletes of the year in 2012.
Wow.
And one of the things that you learn is that you're not strong enough. You're on a mountain, you're in the ocean, you're out there in a very remote and potentially very dangerous situation, and you're not strong enough. And you have to accept your vulnerability and then proceed from there, not being annoyed or upset about your vulnerability, but embracing it and being joyful about it. And so I've lived all my life thinking I'm not stronger than the Arctic ice pack, I'm not stronger than the mountain, and so forth. And now I'm not stronger than the lion. And at first I'm annoyed because I'm facing this lion armed with a wooden club. And then I realize this is my window into myself, into my human past, and it becomes very joyful. And I think if we, the human race, go into these climate change issues, for example, and we're annoyed. Oh, I can't have all this stuff that I want because I have to sacrifice myself so that we can have a planet that's sustainable for our grandchildren. That's not going to work, you see. That hasn't worked. What we have to do is make this transition to being joyful about it, to saying, I will enter into a joyful reciprocal relationship with the earth that allows me to talk with her, to respect her, to go back and forth, and to enter this as a joyous thing. I'm giving up the keys to my bulldozer, you see. Mm-hmm. I'm throwing away the keys to my bulldozer, and this isn't a bummer. This is a happiness.
Right.
I mean, I'm getting old now, and this is the greatest vulnerability. I think accepting your vulnerability in all phases of what you're doing is a really, really good place to be.
Right.
And getting old is, of all the expeditions I've been on, getting old is going to be the roughest because I know that I'm going to die in the end. And I know that whatever I do, I'm going to become vulnerable. And so we're getting kind of a little bit off the topic of the specific book, but the idea of being joyous with what you see around you is certainly very central to the book.
It is. I think that's very true. Now, how long did it take you to write this book?
About 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
You see, Tracy, I started off writing what I call an idea book.
Uh-huh.
And it was called Mythologies We Love and Kill For.
Oh, wow.
And it was tracing the anthropology from the mythologies that created our strength, the fact that by thinking about things that don't exist, we became stronger physically, and that created this imagination, this cooperation that gave us the power to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And then the mythologies we love and kill for, and then most wars are based on mythologies that are so strong, stories are so strong in our head, we feel justified to kill our fellow people. So I started writing this book as a idea book, and then I didn't like it very much, and I thought, I'm a storyteller. I want to take this idea and incorporate it with real characters that you can love, characters that you can relate to, characters that have life. And I want this to be a narrative. I'm not an academic. I don't want to write an academic book. So after writing essentially the whole book as an idea book and not liking it, I said, well, I went on this trip in Samburu and I saw this transition in real life, so let me rewrite the book as a story of my adventures with my friends. And as I started writing it, I breathed this huge sigh of relief and said, this is going to be fun to read. This is going to be fun to write. And so, yeah, that transition took a couple of years.
Well, and you have done that with these people. They're really lovable. I often think of them since finishing the book. I think about how those people are doing.
Well, to me, they were very lovable.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they have gone through more hardship than you or I can imagine, both starvation-type hardship and genocidal warfare-type hardship, and they can be so loving and sweet and mellow and generous, and I wanted to convey that concept.
You did. You did.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Do you keep in touch with them still?
At some level. When I was there, we were involved in a 3-year drought, and
right.
The cattle were starving. The people constantly told me that wealth is grass. When they think of money in the bank, when they think of big credit line on your credit card, they don't think of that. They think of how much grass there is.
Ah.
So they were involved in a big drought, and then there was a switch, just like is happening in California this week, from drought to a climate change switch in the atmospheric and ocean currents, and they had torrential rains and locust plagues. And now the grass was growing, but the locusts were eating all the grass, so it was back to tragedy. And I was able to get some money to Deepa, the head man, who was in charge of basically the village, and get some food to the people. But it's very difficult. Communication is difficult, and I do the best I can.
Good. And I think writing the book was a huge thing to do, not only for those people, but for everybody that will read it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I really do hope it... two things. As a writer, as a storyteller, I want people to go on a journey into Africa and read my book and have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I want people to use this story as as a jumping off point into thinking about how we as human beings are relating to each other and to the world.
You make a lot of contrasts in here between the wealthy people and the young European travelers who won't carry their own luggage, and contrast it with the natives, the guys who you worked with that are actually so happy. And there were several times with the, 5-star hotel there, etc., that really brought home that difference.
At one point in the journey, I attended a wedding.
Right.
And as part of the wedding ceremony, the community builds a house for the new couple, the newlyweds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only the women work on it, and the women build this house over the course of a few hours. So you have 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 women working for a few hours, and you end up with a house.
Right.
No 20-year mortgage.
Right.
No going to the bank every month. You have your house. Well, I know that a lot of people are going to say, well, it wasn't a very fancy house, and I understand that. And I certainly wouldn't want to live in a stick house in the winter in Montana.
Right.
But at the same time, seeing people so joyous with so little, it becomes its own consciousness revelation.
Exactly. John, did you pick out something to read for us?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd love to. I'm going to read a section about tracking the lion. This was on day 3 of the journey.
Great.
So, at first, I am really annoyed that we don't have a gun. What is this ragtag operation anyway? Of course, everyone knows there is a lion in the bushes. That's why we're here, right? I think back to that coffee meeting with Tina back in Cambridge. The smells and tastes of fine food and drink, the climate-controlled relaxation, and above all, the safety. How did that meeting in such a benign and controlled environment lead to my present predicament? And then, suddenly, as a flash of emotion, I am genuinely thankful that we are armed only with my Stone Age weaponry. A gun with its sophisticated metallurgy, geometrically straight rifled barrel, carefully machined bolt and firing pin, with its brass cartridges and deadly lead projectile. This gun would give me the luxury and the permission to relax behind my 21st century facade of dominance over the planet and all its creatures. Without the gun, I need to be, think, feel, and live like an animal. To reach back to our most distant hominin past and embrace the vulnerability of our Paleolithic ancestors. And in reaching back through the coils of DNA, I move through the landscape, experiencing a quality of attention that carries me into a time and mentality that existed even before artists carved the lion-headed man or scratched rocks in the Blombos cave.
I really like that. I love the way that you lead us to understand where art came from and why.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's what I've been trying to do, and that's what I hope my readers will take from this book.
Yeah, I think that for so long, people would say, well, art came just because people were bored. But you don't agree with that.
We live in such a wonderful, 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 varied, beautiful world. Yeah, we just have to reach out and touch it and accept the gifts that nature gives us with thanks and with total joy. I mean, look, I talk about the mythologies. The book is about the mythologies. And who are the spinners of mythology? Well, our political leaders, of course, our religious leaders.
Right.
I mean, they bring us spiritual hope, but they also bring us mythologies. And the corporations. And we live very much, I think, the corporations might be the most powerful spinners of mythologies. You will be happy if you only buy such and such.
Right.
Oh my gosh, what a horrible story.
Right, right. And it's everywhere.
And so what I'm saying in this passage, physically, I'm bummed because I don't have the gun. I'm bummed because I have been stripped of my 21st century technology. But what I'm saying in myth, in mythology, because I am a storyteller, is you take away my iPad, you take away my phone, you take away the television, you take away my carbon fiber mountain bike, and I'm bummed, right?
Right.
Same way I'm bummed when you take away my rifle.
Right.
You take away the keys to my bulldozer. I can no longer bulldoze up a wetland to build my fancy house.
Right.
But then, if you look at your situation, you realize that that's been a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
That you have opened your heart and mind to something much deeper and richer than what you got taken away.
You use a lot of references to E.O. Wilson in here.
Yes, and he is one of my heroes.
I can tell.
He is a scientist.
Yes.
Well, because he's a scientist, but he's also a leader in the consciousness revolution. I want to tell you a little bit about that term, consciousness revolution, where it came from.
Please.
It was not from E.O. Wilson, but a colleague of E.O. Wilson's, Paul Ehrlich. So Paul Ehrlich wrote The Population Bomb way back in the 1960s, which was a groundbreaking work in the environmental movement around 1960, 1970, when Earth Day 1 was happening.
Mm-hmm.
I attended a lecture by Dr. Ehrlich. He's a distinguished professor of population biology at Stanford. And he said that as a population biologist, the carrying capacity of the Earth is about 3.5 billion, whereas actually right now we have twice that, 7 or 7.5 billion people on the Earth. And this was a big lecture hall, and he went on. And the next morning, I had coffee with Dr. Ehrlich. I was lucky enough, and I said, Dr. Ehrlich, how are we going to get from 7 billion to 3.5 billion? I accept your science, but how are we going to make the journey?
Right.
And he said, we need a consciousness revolution. We can't do it out of a feeling of responsibility. We have to do it out of our hearts. And you mentioned E.O. Wilson. When you read E.O. Wilson's work, and I've read him extensively,
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't use that term, but that's what he says. We have to dedicate half the planet to natural systems. And in order to do that, we have to have what Dr. Ehrlich said was a consciousness revolution. These two great scientists are, I am sure, in total agreement. And the idea, to me, why I like these people, why I read them extensively, is they are scientists at the highest level, and they realize that science, however powerful it is, and however much a tool it is for a journey, is only a tool. The journey has to come from elsewhere. Right.
And you have run with that over the years.
Yeah, I really think so. We had in one of my expeditions a number of years ago, we were in the high Arctic, and we were in a constriction, and the ice from the North Pole Ocean was coming down and impacting against the land and creating a big commotion. Big chunks of ice as big as a football field were getting smushed and cracked and broken and flying into the air and sprinkling ice crystals that rainbowed in the sun and groaning and moaning, and the whole ocean was alive.
Wow.
And there was no way we could paddle out in that ocean in our 65-pound plastic kayaks and survive. But if we stayed put, winter would come, and we weren't prepared for winter, and we would starve to death and freeze to death. So this, again, is your vulnerability. And when you're faced with this vulnerability, your first reaction can be annoyance. It often is.
Right.
Darn, nature is turning against me.
Right.
Darn, I'm unfortunate. Darn, what happened? And that doesn't work.
Right.
And a friend texted me and said, John, don't do anything stupid, which is, kind of okay advice.
Right.
But then he said something that was much deeper, is if you see this as a barrier, if you see this as a problem, if you get frustrated and trying to climb over the barrier or beat your fist against the barrier or try to combat it, you will die.
Wow.
You have to assume that the barrier does not exist, that everything is okay, man.
It's cool.
And just relax.
Yeah.
And let things flow. And, I mean, to be beating on the same drum over and over, this is what we're doing with climate change. If we see that this is a problem, that we're going to have to give up the keys to our bulldozer, if we see this as a barrier and, we're going to have to fight against it, we're going to have to fight something, we're going to lose.
Right.
Because the Earth and its systems are way too powerful. We need to see this as an opportunity.
Exactly.
Wow, aren't we lucky? We have this opportunity. It's not a problem, it's an opportunity. And over again in my life, in the Arctic ice, tracking the lion, facing climate change, we have an opportunity to change our way of thinking into a more joyous pattern of thought and pattern of living our life.
That's so true. And that's a good note to end on, because we are running out of time.
Okay, Tracy, this has been fun.
It has been fun. Thank you so much for writing this book. It's like I said, an important book.
Well, thank you. I'll just give the title again for our audience, Tracking Lions, Myth, and Wilderness in Samburu. And thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, John. And that was John Turk talking about his book, Tracking Lions, Myth, and Wilderness in Semburu. This is Tracy Hales-Vass with Right on Four Corners. Make sure you check your mail for the San Juan College Community Learning Catalog. I'll be teaching 3 classes in January that you might be interested in. If you have any questions, you can contact me at righton@sanjuancollege.edu. This is KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.